Hey everyone, welcome to the documentary filmmaker panel of the Arizona International Film Festival 2022, the 30th. I'm so excited to be here with this extremely talented group of women documentarians. Makes me really happy to see that. Always been such a male-dominated genre. So on that note, I want to ask how you all became documentarians, how long you've been doing it, anything you want to share about that. Should I call who goes first? We'll say Amanda, why don't you go first, because you're the first person on my in my view.
No problem. So yeah, I'm Amanda Kinsey, and I am the director of Jews of the Wild West. And I've had primarily a corporate media career. So I was a producer for the Today Show at NBC for 13 years. And then I started my own production company in 2013 and was still living in New York, doing work for Vice and for PBS, as well as corporate clients. And then I moved to Colorado almost 5 years ago. So the work that I was doing at the Today Show was short form, but I specialized in a series called American Story, which were essentially little mini 5-minute documentaries. And then at PBS, I was doing like hour-long work, and then Vice, I was doing like docu-series, so like 20-minute vignettes. And I think all of those are kind of interesting, different approaches. My film now is 80 minutes, so it's the longest film that I've done. But yeah, that's what I've been doing for the past 20 years.
Is there something that attracted you to going into making feature-length documentaries?
You know, I think it's really nice to be able to explore something and not feel that you have to leave a lot sort of unturned. I think to be able to kind of deep dive is an interesting experience, and I think in a lot of ways more satisfying. So, you know, I think, and I think it also depends on the story. Like this story lent itself to that. You know, if it'd been a story that didn't, then that would be okay too, and it would have been shorter. But
fair enough. Anu, how about you?
I had a much longer sort of route to documentary filmmaking. I started out as a math major in India and then switched to journalism, was a feature writer for a few years, and then decided that my love for nonfiction storytelling is what was driving me. And so then eventually made the shift to documentary filmmaking over the last, so again, that's sort of a 20-year journey in a nutshell. And yeah, and I'm the co-director for Musher, which is a film that we're screening here. And it's about 4 women sled-dog racers in the upper Midwest, which is completely out of my wheelhouse. So what started out as a telling stories from within the community also morphed into, I am so curious about this life, and I want to know more. So that's sort of been my documentary journey, is people, curiosity, really looking for people pushing those boundaries, but then really finding what makes them love the life that they're living, and like really change things in order to live that life. So
was it a particular interest in women doing that kind of thing that led you to the sled dog racers?
No, not in this particular case, but I think as the production and post continued, that definitely changed how we told the story. So we started out actually with a lot more people. So we followed many more people than the 4 women that are in the film, the protagonists. But yeah, so I think by the time we reached post, we definitely knew that we wanted to focus on them. And I can say that that was driven by my co-director, Laurie, and my interest in telling that story about the women specifically.
And you said before you did this, you told stories from within the community. What are you referring to? Was something of more personally you were connected to?
Yeah, I think most of my films have been based in India. So telling stories, that I was a lot more familiar with. The other feature that I'm working on is currently also filming in India and the US. So it's a much more of a immigrant story. So very personal in that way.
Yeah. Okay, all right. And Sam, I know you and your mom have a history as documentarians, that this is a really personal story. So I'm assuming you got into documentary filmmaking through your mom, but tell us a little bit about what led you to it.
Sure. Well, good morning from Australia. It's very early here, so forgive me for being a little bit sleepy. Yeah, I think I spent most of my life and childhood trying to not become a filmmaker. My granddad was also a filmmaker, so I'm third generation, which is quite rare because it's such a new art form, and so it sort of felt like a destiny that I was trying to rebel against. And I fell into filmmaking almost just as a hobby because I thought it would be fun, and it so was not something that I wanted to do professionally. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go to space and do something very scientific and mathematical. And yeah, I just started doing it for fun and got sucked in. It can be very addictive, and you sort of feel like you're as someone in the film actually says, like you're touching the profound when you get to documentary, because you're able to tell people's stories and share people's stories in a way that you can't really do in any other art form. And I sort of was working in scripted when my grandma asked my mum and I to make this film. So her husband was a filmmaker and her daughter's a filmmaker, so she really understood the power of documentary. And my mum had made a documentary about her that won at Tribeca called The Man Who Stole My Mother's Face, that was about sexual assault in South Africa. And so she really understood the power of documentary. And so when she came to the decision that she wanted to be the Greta Thunberg of the elderly and fight for the right to die, she just knew that a documentary was what she had to do, and asked my mum and I to make it happen. So yeah, it wasn't something I ever wanted to make, this film, but have made it for her and have now become incredibly empathetic to that world. And I think I think empathy is maybe the biggest reason why I stayed in documentary and why I continue to be passionate about it. I think my big motivator for my life is empathy, increasing empathy. And I don't think that there's an art form that can create empathy for another worldview like documentary can. And making this film opened my eyes to the experiences of people who are elderly and the terminally ill and those who have to say goodbye to their family in really beautiful and fun ways. And I'm infinitely more empathetic for having been on this journey, and I hope the audiences who watch the film have a similar experience.
Yeah, that's a really great way to say it too, that you're interested in empathy and creating empathy. So in that being your focus, you maybe don't feel like you have to restrict yourself to doing personal films if there's something else you feel strongly about, right?
No, the next one's going to be a comedy about someone else's family.
Yeah, I can see why you would want to do that after this film.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I think I'm actually have sort of been sucked back into scripted for a little bit. But I think personal family documentaries can be really, really, really powerful and strong and are so important. This was just a tough one to make, and I'm not sure I will do it again.
I can see that. We'll get back and talk more about your specific project. Ivey-Camille, I've read about you making an amazing film that I watched on YouTube when you were 13. So you started young. What brought you into filmmaking and documentary filmmaking? Talk to me about that a little bit.
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you to the panelists. I'm excited to be on with you, and I'm sorry if I cut out. But yeah, I started making films when I was 9. I actually started in front of the camera around 3. I thought I was going to be Britney Spears. Clearly that didn't happen. So I actually wound up on a film, a TV show called Into the West, and it was a Steven Spielberg production. And I was supposed to be on set for a day as an extra, and I got roped in for being there for a month. And I fell in love with all the smoke and the horses And, you know, like I got to hang out with Wes Studi and Irene Bedard, who just phenomenal Native actors and actresses. And I kind of got completely immersed and kind of like fell in love. And at 9 years old, my uncle Cleepanolly started Out of Your Backpack Media. And I needed somewhere to go for the summer, and I wanted to make movies. And so we started off there, and it was short films that we would just put up on YouTube when YouTube was lawless. And then in the footsteps of Yellow Women, I started at 11, and I did when I was 13, and it took off. It was a 26-minute docudrama about from 1864 to 1868 was the Navajo Long Walk, and it follows my great-great-great-grandmother, Yellow Woman, who was at one point in time the most wanted woman in the United States for fighting off the U.S. cavalry. Wow. And they caught her when she was 7 months pregnant by shooting her in the belly, and she tied her sash belt and marched all the way to Bosque Redondo. And in doing that, it was like a wake-up call about how much it is. I love the film. I have a hard time watching it. My camera skills are not great yet. And then this film, ever since then, I got roped in the documentary world. I've probably made around 200 films, short, either producing, editing, cinematography, whatever. A lot of student-made productions. And then this film, Powerlands, started making when I was 19, and I'm 26 now, so it's been about 7 or 8 years that we've been doing this project.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's a project that relates to you personally and your community. So is that the kind of filmmaking you want to focus on exclusively, or do you see yourself doing other kinds of things?
Yeah, I would love to get into other parts of it, but truthfully, I've got 2 other films that are, one's in production and one's in pre-production. And yeah, they're all about my family. I can't get out of it. I love my family. They're really cool. And I'm super lucky to be able to be so close and enjoy their stories and their time. So I try to take full advantage. And especially as an Indigenous woman, you know, it's our role to carry forward and to hold our stories and to hold our families to those levels. So I like to know the stories so I can keep it going.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, your film is really quite powerful. All of the films are amazing. And that's quite a great piece of activist filmmaking. So how did you all finance your films? Because I think for people who are starting out or wanting to make a documentary, even coming from, you know, doing narrative film or whatever, or coming from news or journalism, it can be quite daunting to undertake a film. So Amanda, how was funding for you? How was that process?
Sure. So the film's budget was $175,000. And I knew I could do it for that because that's what PBS had given me in the past for similar length projects. But that is obviously a modest feature length documentary budget. I was able to raise just over 130,000 from grants and donations. There's over like 120 individuals that gave to the film. And I did a crowdfunding campaign, like an online one at the very end, which I can talk to you a little bit more about kind of what I learned from that if you want. That was, I raised $20,000 for that. So that was like specifically to go towards editing cost. Mm-hmm. And the funding, it's a mix of grants and individual donors, as I mentioned. The grants, you know, I feel like it's the bane of every like independent filmmaker's existence. The grants that I found that ended up being successful for me were primarily family foundations that in some cases, the foundations had experience giving to documentary films, but it wasn't like specifically a documentary grant I was applying for. Mm-hmm. And those ranged anywhere from $40,000 to like $1,000. Mm-hmm. I found applying to like the very specific, like a documentary grant, a very aggravating process. I found like those, one, people ask a lot of you, they're a lot of work. And, you know, I like people often say, oh, they're so competitive, but I mean, I think good content's good content. I don't know if that really is what's driving it. What I found was frustrating for me, and why I feel like I didn't get a lot of success in those kind of grants, was that they are generally so specific as to where in the timeline you are production wise. Like you have to be in pre-production, or you have to be in production, or you have to be in post-production. And oftentimes you apply for the grant and then they'll have like a 6-month, period where they're, reviewing all this material that you've given them. And but that's like a lifetime in production, right? So if you applied for, in pre-production, 6 months from now, you probably aren't still in pre-production, and yet the grant was only for pre-production. That was kind of no one could give me a straight answer as to why that's so common. And I found that was common for both nonprofits and state-related grants. So I don't know if other people had that experience. The crowdfunding, I had not done crowdfunding like online campaign before. And I talked to like a bunch of people that worked for those different platforms and read a lot about it. And everyone sort of had the same thing to say. And I don't know if other people had different experiences. What people told me is exactly what happened. So I was told that unless I was some sort of influencer or celebrity, that I could count on raising $20,000 likely in an online crowdfunding campaign over the course of a month. And you wanted to keep it to that month because it sort of drives everybody to a deadline. What's interesting is my offline fundraising, which was the majority of my fundraising, I didn't know everyone that donated. And sometimes I never even talked to somebody, just a donation would arrive, which was amazing. For the online, with a couple exceptions, everyone I knew, like it was my social network. It was, friends from elementary school and family, whatever. But that's where they showed up, was on the online piece of it, which I thought was sort of interesting. The other thing I was told was that you had to raise a third of it within the first week of that month. And so for it to be successful, like statistically, if you don't, you're less likely to complete your goal. And that means you sort of have to get people to pledge the money before you go public with what you're doing. And so, I did that piece of it. And, then there's like more kind of the minutia of things. You need a trailer, but you also need like a video of yourself specifically asking for money and what you're asking for. I mean, I shot that with my phone, but that was kind of something everyone said I needed. And then you have to have giveaways because there's expectation that there's a giveaway, but you don't want them to be of too great monetary value, obviously, because it cuts into your profit. And so you have to find something that's kind of like people are glad to have, but isn't going to like put you in an imposition. So, and then a lot of social media content to go with it. So it's a lot of work. And the reason I was advised, and I think was correct to do it at the end, was that it's a lot of work, and I felt like I needed a secondary purpose to it, since it's only about 20,000 that I raised, and that was what everyone thought I could. So it became like also a marketing element. It was able to drive social media traffic for me. It got like buzzy. There was more like media interest because I did that. But I don't know if I did it at the beginning, it would have had the same impact. I also wouldn't have had the same amount of content to work with when it came to social media. So anyway, I don't know if any of that's helpful, but that was kind of my general experience.
It feels like a kind of demeaning process to me, the way that we filmmakers have to struggle to get money. Is it the same in Australia, Sam? How do you find raising money?
Yeah, so similarities and major differences. The hoops that you have to jump through are very much the same. It's very, very time consuming applying for financing, and it's very competitive, and it's very dependent on who's on your team, what kind of distribution you have in place, and where you are in your process. For this project, we have an incredible conference called the Australian International Documentary Conference, and they have a pitching forum there that's sort of similar to what they do at Hot Docs, if anyone's been to Hot Docs. So they choose 8 projects, I think, from around Australia, and you pitch publicly in front of everyone at the conference, and there's broadcasters and marketplace there, and they give you live feedback. And so we pitched this documentary at the AIDC, and we won 2 prizes. One was to go to Hot Docs in Canada to pitch, and the other was to go to Doc Edge in New Zealand. So it was set to be an incredible year of financing and travel. And we won those prizes in March 2020. So obviously none of that happened. But we did then at the conference get a commission from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So from that, we were able to then get state funding from our screen funding body in West Australia called Screen West. And that allowed us to make 2 by 1 hours for the ABC and the feature version that's screening at Arizona.
Okay, how about Anu? How was it? I would think getting funding for a mushing movie would be challenging.
Yeah, so this film was made on the backs of all of our friends. So we didn't actually raise very much money for it at all. And but we have a pretty amazing community of filmmakers that I've worked with for about 15 years now. And we reached out, and I mean, I will say this, you know, when I look back at when we started this film, it was a labor of love from the outset. And we thought, we're like, it's going to take a year. It's not going to be big. We're just going to do this and it'll be done. And it ended up becoming much longer than that. And then the pandemic had a role to play with that too. But I wouldn't do it again that particular way, just because I think you can also only rely on your friends so much before they're like, you know, we have our own lives. But I do really appreciate that they came together for us in this case. We raised about a third of our budget, which was about $25,000 through local grants that were artist-based grants. So they weren't content-based, but they were, you know, like local Chicago. The city of Chicago has some amazing artist grants. So does the Illinois Arts Council. I teach documentary filmmaking at DePaul University in Chicago. So I had research grants and I had a lot of support, as did my co-director, Lori Little, who also teaches, but at a different university. We had a lot of support just in terms of research assistants and students who also worked on the project when it came to post-production. So in terms of, you know, logging the film. So it you know, the film is about community, and it really brought together a community to make it. I loved it. Never will do it again. We'll definitely raise the money up front, pay everybody a reasonable wage. But, you know, I mean, I do think it takes all kinds of work to get films made. And when it's love, it's love. So, yeah.
Yeah. Ivey-Camille, your film, I mean, you're in like 4 countries with this film. Oh, I can't hear you, Ivy. Can't hear you.
The traffic noise, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, you're in 4 countries, right?
Yeah, 4 countries. Oaxaca, Standing Rock, Black Mesa, and Standing Rock, Black Mesa in the US. The Philippines and
Colombia. Mexico. Well, oh, you said Oaxaca, right? Okay, so that sounds very expensive. And I know you had Jordan Flaherty producing. He's got a bit of a track record. Was that helpful to you in raising money? How did you pull this all together?
Yeah, it definitely. Jordan had amazing connections. Jordan worked with Underbridge. Jordan worked with Frontline Defenders, who was one of our largest funders. And so that was awesome to have that. And I also, some of it was, you know, reaching and outsourcing to friends and family. Like my grandfather at one point donated $500 so I could get to Standing Rock, you know? So like there was a lot of friends and family donation. And then we did some of it out of pocket and funded it that way. And then we also worked with Firelight Media and Fourth World based in Seattle, as well as I got some help from, not financially, but advice from ITBS and IDA to help make sure that my treatments and everything were locked down. Also, it was kind of sneaky, but the Laura Flanders show would like pay for us to go do a segment for them, and then we would use that as an excuse to pay for the flights
Hey, you got to do what you got to do.
Exactly. So that was part of how we did that as well. And then it would, of course, to make sure everything was good, we would like film on different equipment and just completely keep it separate. But there was a few times where it was something like that. But most of it was, frontline defenders. And then we did get a few grants here and there to help out, but not as many. You know, the communist army makes it really difficult to get funding.
No doubt they do. I want to get more specific about some of your projects. I'll stay with you, Ivey-Camille. So one thing that I'm just so excited to see films by Indigenous filmmakers. I have a really strong preference for seeing people of the community they're making films about. I think particularly with oppressed people, to me, there's a lot of white savior filmmaking about Indigenous communities. And I want to know how you feel about that and how what you see, how important you see it is for Indigenous filmmakers to be making their own stories.
I think it's crucial. One, you know, when I was younger and before a lot of Indigenous communities, like I grew up without running water or electricity. How would I know how to work a camera? It wasn't until I moved into town and became, you know, we got Western education at that sense. And so for a lot of Indigenous communities, they're just now getting this equipment. So the possibility to tell their own stories is finally available.
Mm-hmm.
So the moment of the white savior needed is past for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And Indigenous people telling Indigenous stories is the only way to go about it. I look at it and I see so often it's this like swollen bellies with flies flying around a child's head, and it's like, or a starving dog. But when I go into a community, I see food that's rich, and I see colorful clothing, and I see lots of smiling faces, and I see these beautiful matriarchal lines being passed down. And so that's why I feel like it's necessary for Indigenous people to recognize it. It's because our worlds don't necessarily modern Western idea. And so because we know what our worlds look like, we can tell our stories better.
Absolutely. One thing I noticed in my own community that, you know, we have been the subject of so many people's gaze that we've internalized the expectations. When I turn a camera to somebody in my own community, they offer up that sort of story that the white savior people have been pulling out of them for, you know, decades and decades. And so there's like so much awareness around resisting these conventions and stereotypical expectations. I mean, have you found that as a filmmaker, I had to like decolonize my mind, and did you find any residual stuff in you or the people you film around these?
All the time. I mean, for me as a Navajo, the only stuff we got was John Wayne films, Pocahontas, and the closest thing to somebody who looked like me in modern stories was Selena. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of my transitioning over was also learning how to turn media into an Indigenous art form. Because, you know, we do art a little bit differently than you look at a lot of like Western art that happens. And so reframing that definitely need to happen, as well as just being comfortable seeing myself and my people around me, because down to little things such as like beauty standards, you know, in the US we have straight white perfect teeth are beauty standards, but you look at places like the reservations, dental care isn't always provided under IHS, Indian Health Services. Also, they're most of the time you don't have dental access for a lot of these communities, so you'll sometimes see people without teeth in these communities. And based on our Western mindset of how people are supposed to look and behave, it almost, you automatically almost want to reframe how you hold them in the lens. But again, growing up in these communities, it's not weird, or you know, that's part of the redlining that we get as, you know, people within like not rich people in the United States. Dental care is part of redlining. And so, you know, also allowing that lens to talk about it and normalize it also provides opportunities for jobs and other things in those communities as well, which is always a benefit. But yeah, re-standardizing our beauty concept, how stories are supposed to be told. You know, so oftentimes natives, we just ramble and it'll go on and on. And you started off talking about the stars and you're ending talking about a plant that died 300 years ago. And that's how native stories are told, but that's not how they're told in the Western mindset. So allowing that to happen and allowing to reframe that, and also reframe the idea of the viewer to accept that type of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you did an amazing job in terms of representation, and it was just such a powerful thing to see. I want to move on to Sam, and you know, your film was so personal. If I don't know if you all have been able to see Sam's film yet. It's about her grandmother who chooses assisted end of life care because she's getting older, and Sam and her mom document this. And was there ever a time when you were shooting where you felt ambivalent about having a camera there and doing this for your grandmother? And I know it was your
The
grandmother's
whole
wish.
time.
Really? Okay. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's an important difference in the first act of the film was a home video. So Grandma and I went on a Euro trip when I was 24 and she was 86 to we went on a river cruise down the Danube River, and I took my camera because I'm a filmmaker and I just thought it would be such a wonderful home video, or maybe I'd make a little short and share it with family and friends. And on that trip she has an accident at my hands essentially, and it was on day 3, and so the whole trip kind of goes awry. She ends up in hospital, and I at that point I was 24 and with an elderly person who I'd never had to sort of one-on-one care for, and now I was her complete. We're in a hospital in Vienna. She doesn't speak German. Doctors don't speak English. The bills amount, I used all my savings to keep her there. It was very intense, and filming that was a complete coping mechanism. And she just kept saying, like, keep filming. And so it became, when things got stressful, rather than having to exist in the moment, I was thinking, okay, so I should probably get a cutaway of the doctor's feet, and I should probably get a shot from over there, and how's the sound, and it was a total coping mechanism for that part of the film. Then when we got home, the footage kind of went away for a little while, and then when Grandma came out and said that she was ready to go and that she wanted to go out with a bang, the footage sort of came back out. And then filming the rest of the film was not so much that experience. It felt less like a coping mechanism and more like it was adding to the intensity of what was going on. I mean, she had her Switzerland trip booked for December 2019, so we had a year to prepare to say goodbye, and she wanted it to be joyous, so she had a Mad Hatters themed farewell party, full Alice in Wonderland costumes, just like she was such an outrageous woman. And so she wanted there to be lots of joy, but at the same time we're trying to be there as a daughter and a granddaughter and say goodbye to this person. And she's our whole family. I'm an only child and her husband's passed away, and so like it's just the 3 of us. So we're saying goodbye to a third of our family, really. But at the same time, we're also trying to be there as filmmakers, and it became just a lot to juggle. So when we went to Switzerland, we hired a film crew, and that was the best decision we ever made, because it allowed us to put that side away and just be there as a daughter and a granddaughter. Mm-hmm. And it made such a difference. And I mean, even the night before her appointment at the clinic, I was in the hotel foyer with the film crew at midnight talking about process, and every night I was dumping camera cards and data wrangling, and then getting up the next day and trying to switch that part of my brain off. So it still was challenging and overwhelming and took a long time to recover from, but having someone else to film it and to manage that side of things was just made such a difference. Because in the final moments, I completely forgot about the camera. I forgot about the Sandy and the cameraman, and they were like family by that point. Because when you go through something like that with someone, you know, we have a bond that is hard to explain, that formed so fast.
You went through something incredibly powerful
Yeah.
together, and
Yeah.
and it's very much like Ivey-Camille's work, a piece of activism. This is a film that's trying to change the world. And along those lines, have you seen some impact from the film? How is it being received? Tell me if there's anything with that.
Yeah, so since the film's come out, every Australian state except for one has passed assisted dying laws.
Wow.
They are still pretty restrictive, so they're just for terminally ill people who have less than 6 months to live, but it's still
Huge progress.
an incredible, yeah. And I think Grandma, in classic Grandma fashion, was at the very pointy end of an already very pointy debate. The conversation brings up a lot in people. I think people are often uncomfortable talking about death and thinking about their own deaths and the deaths of their loved ones. It's not something that a lot of people want to talk about or think about or plan for. And this process was really about shaking that and saying, no, like, I think you can plan for someone's death in a way that's not morbid and miserable. Like, we had a death planning day that was one of the funniest fun experiences with Grandma's closest friends and me and Mum, and we had champagne and it was totally silly and wonderful. And so I think the film brings up a lot in people, and some people find it really uncomfortable, and some people find it completely transforms their idea of what death can be. And so I get messages every day on my emails and Instagram from people who've just watched the film and want to share their story, because I think everybody has a death story, and this is a film that kind of maybe changes the way that you've experienced a death or that you will experience a death.
And I feel like you really could have like cut out the accident piece. I think it's one of the most powerful parts of the film. And I think for all of us documentary filmmakers, that implicating yourself and showing these unflattering or these moments that don't fit the image, you know, the beatific image of whatever you're trying to portray. I loved in Ivey-Camille's film, there's a Filipino woman showing some plants and she's like smoking a cigarette. And I so loved that. And I loved the accident that you showed, the accident, you showed your complicated feelings around that accident. Did you ever consider not showing that? Was that ever something that you felt ambivalent about?
No, I don't. I think it's such a crucial part of mine and my grandma's relationship deepening. I found it, I couldn't watch it for a really long time, and I mean, we're doing full disclosure here. I had some therapy about it. I had it's called EMDR therapy, which is like trauma-related therapy.
Sure.
And after I did a few sessions of that, I was able to actually watch the footage, because I would just look away. And if you're directing a documentary, you can't not be watching your own.
Hard to edit when you're looking away. Yes.
So that was really helpful. And I think what came from that accident was such a deeper relationship with my grandma, that it was such an important moment, and it's referenced all throughout the film. And I mean, I have seen myself from every angle, crying from every possible. I have got no ego left at this point.
Good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Amanda, I wanted to ask you made a film, which I've made a film like this, where there is no real narrative through line in your film. I mean, it's a historic, you're telling history. And so you're using talking heads, you're using archival footage. What were the challenges? I find that kind of documentary making is extremely challenging, and you did such a great job of keeping it fresh and interesting and engaging. And that's not easy to do. So talk to me about that a little bit.
Sure. So Jews of the Wild West is the story of Jewish migration of Jewish refugees between 1840 to 1920 into the West. And that was a complex thing. I myself am not Jewish. And when I started thinking about doing this project, I really had to get educated about anti-Semitism in a way that I hadn't done before as a non-Jewish person. And what I think is sort of interesting about like this panel is that not only are we're all female filmmakers, but I think in our own way, we're all trying to amplify voices that have been marginalized. And I think, and I'm sure people agree, that there is an imperative for storytellers to be doing that today. And figuring out how to best do that is sometimes sort of a complicated thing. And as I started to learn more about anti-Semitism, what I quickly discovered is that a core piece of that is often in the questioning of Jewish voices and the attempted erasing of history. And so I felt that if I did this, that it was going to be its own challenge, and certainly as a non-Jewish person, its own challenge, but I also felt like it was a means of standing up to anti-Semitism. So similar to a lot of these other films, there's an activism component to what it is. It was challenging because this is obviously a very fraught chapter of American history. And I think that the more we kind of go back in our American history and break away from these narrow narratives that we have, that giving voices to people and their experiences, I think that that's like a real obligation that we have as storytellers today. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what I tried to do with the film. So the film does not have a narrator, which is intentional. I wanted to be primarily Jewish voices. There are sort of two narratives that are happening in the film. So there's the Jewish migration story, and then there's the history of the Wild West. And both are very, very complicated. I relied heavily. I have two Jewish advisors to the film and one Native American advisor to the film. And that really was important in making sure that I hopefully got it right. And with the exception of two members of the Acoma Pueblo who tell a story of a Jewish merchant who comes into their world, everyone else in the film is Jewish. And so I felt like I was providing a platform, hopefully, for those voices to finally be heard, and for this, history to, hopefully people watch it and they go, wow, like I had no idea, and the focus is certainly on Jewish history, but there is an element in coming, it's a difficult thing because I didn't want to approach it as a white savior component to it when it came to the Native American history, but I also didn't want to gloss over, obviously, this being a horrific period in time too for people. And so I tried to do that with dignity, and I tried to do that, there's the piece that is about the Acoma. It's specific to the Acoma, but I think some of what the two members of the Acoma have to say is it also pushes the narrative forward as to what was happening for a lot of tribes, and their experiences are different, but there are some ways that obviously they were being treated by the outside world. So those are sort of kind of the complicated pieces of that. And for me, the magic of the film is where those two narratives meet. And so I was always trying to kind of come back to that. In terms of what I decided to include. And yes, people had to carry it, because I didn't want there to be a narrator, because once you have a narrator, then it does get into, I'm writing a script and I'm hiring someone to voice it over. And then it no longer is about those voices.
But also you didn't have, when I say there was no narrative through line, there was no contemporary action happening. So you were really just telling history, and that's incredibly challenging to do on film.
Right. So I always approach, I think because I have this Today Show background, what I'm always trying to do is figure out, like, why is history relevant today? Why do we care today? And I do have a few, I think 2 official historians that are in the film out of like, I think it's 21 voices. There's a lot of voices in the film. And though I'm very grateful for those historians, I'm always trying to figure out like, what are the descendants that I can connect with, who has a more intimate look at this whole experience, and trying to get back to that and the root of that. And then an element of being able to take people places. I mean, that's a big part of where, what I tried to do with the film, and making it more personal and not talking heads. And so that was something that I'm proud of in the film, because it was not easy to always, it's one thing to find someone who's like a historian at a university with a book. It's a lot harder sometimes to, find other voices. And that's where I really want to go back and make sure that I had that piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did an amazing job with that. I want to move on to Anu. Anu, you also, like Amanda, took on going into a group that you were not a part of, and learning it from the ground up, getting people to commit to be in your project and make this with you. And how was that experience?
I think it happened in parts. It didn't happen all at once. So when we first went up, so we filmed at the Copper Dog race, which is a race that happens, it's a staged sled dog race that happens in Copper Harbor, Calumet region of Michigan, but on the western side of the Michigan lake. So straight up Wisconsin. So my co-director, Lori, often goes up for trips there and met a musher at the motel that she was staying, and they had the dogs in the big van parked out front, and started a conversation, which led to us going up there and meeting people and just talking to people. Being dog lovers, I think that was our first entry into the story. And I mean, and I'll be frank, like, it's being a dog lover is one thing, and then going to a space and seeing 20, 30, 50 dogs, in sort of this compound, and they're all chained. It wasn't the easiest of experiences. So then that's like a question that leads to a different kind of a story. But as we got to know the people, I think we started learning about what it meant for them, and the kind of relationships that they had with the dogs. So that was definitely an impetus at that early point. And then over the years, so we went back, met with one group of people who introduced us to another group of people and met them, and then slowly found the people that we were really interested in following. And and part of like what we were interested in were the people who had just amazing relationships with their dogs, and had decided to change their lifestyles in order to accommodate this kind of a life, and it was huge. So we were really lucky, I think, that we were able to find people between the ages of 11 and 62, and at the time that we started, and to not only see somebody who was saying, I started doing this 10, 15 years ago, and now I feel stronger than ever. Martha, who's 62, but then also seeing how she feels about Kelsey, who's 11, and it's like she's the voice of the next generation, and seeing sort of that passing of the baton over time. So it was, building trust in any kind of a film is a slow, it takes time, it's slow, it's an experience. You take 2 steps forward a little bit, you go back a little bit, and then you sort of go back in and say, okay, hey, how about now? Like, we're back, and can we have this conversation? And all the while you're doing your research to see, what is it about these people that we're really interested in? What is it about this race, as opposed to, the more popular Iditorods or, the very competitive races? And we realized that what kept drawing us back was the sense of community. So it's not just community coming to the race, but it's everybody who supports that particular, group of people. And it frankly felt very much like an independent filmmaker community, to like create this analogy, where I've been to film festivals and you go in and, every restaurant is like, oh, wait, there's this film festival in town, you got to go see, it just had that sort of joy in that moment. And I think by the time we were editing this, in the pandemic and feeling so isolated, all of that felt so good. So that over that year of editing, just coming back to it and being able to speak to it. So I think it definitely changed maybe even our trajectory, where it was about individualism. Look at this person's relationship, and it definitely became bigger and brought us back to that idea of, you know, like people coming together and people and their dogs coming together and what they did. So I took a bit of a tangent there, but I hope I answered your question.
Yes, very much. I want to ask you all, what is the future for these films that are in the festival? Do you have distribution? What's going on? And also, if you want to talk about what your next project is, or projects, plural. So we can start with Ivey-Camille.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm currently in the talks with some distribution. Nothing's signed or figured out yet. It's kind of scary going forward with something like this. You know, I'm like, oh God, what if I make the wrong decision? And I care about these people who like let me tell their stories so much. But it's been really amazing to see the outpouring of interest. So right now we're still doing the circuit. And we're getting educational distribution and streaming distribution, but I want to keep all my rights to the film. So it's a little bit, I'm a little bit picky.
Makes sense.
And then I am working on one film that I'm in the middle of making a work sample for called She Breathes. And it's about, in 1989, a woman got lost in Wind Cave for 38 hours, sparking the third largest cave search in US history. And Wind Cave is the birthplace of the Lakota Nation. And in this time, she was almost reborn herself. And fast forward to 95, she's giving birth to me. So it's the story of my mom, and it's a look at motherhood, whereas the third generation of the mother being Earth, and then my mother, and then me as her daughter, helping to tell the story. And then I'm also in pre-production on another film, and I don't mind talking about it because if anyone wants to jump me on the story, go ahead, because it's important. But it is looking at two cases of murdered Native women, both killed by their boyfriends, both killed around the same time of year, both killed in the same area, and how the post-militarization after 9/11 affected how these cases were solved. And so we're looking at what happened between the 20-year difference, and why one case was solved and why another case wound up with the man who murdered her having custody of her children. And so that's the other film that I'm working on. I just have gotten some recent contacts to help it out. So heavy work, and I always support people adding therapy into their film budget because that's what I do. But those are my projects at the moment.
Okay, exciting. Looking forward to seeing them. Amanda, what are you working on, and what is your distribution plan for your film?
So I just recently signed with a sales agent. So we're at the very beginning stages of that, and kind of putting feelers out. So there's not a lot to report because it literally just happened like last week. But you know, hopefully that will do well. And you know, I think that has been an interesting process. I think definitely I've gone through a couple of distribution deals that came on the table before I had the sales agent that just wasn't the right match. I think sort of like, you know, Ivey-Camille says, this is your baby, right? And you do feel this incredible responsibility for everyone that gave their time and their stories to you. And you want to make sure you do right by them. And it's a hard industry. There's a lot of noise. I feel like there's just like a lot of noise. And anyway, so I finally found a sales agent that I really like and trust. And hopefully it's in good hands at that point, which is a huge relief to sort of be at that point. And you know what I want to do next? I don't know. I'm exhausted. I'm like totally exhausted, and I feel like I just need a little bit of time. I mean, I'm sure everyone can relate to this.
You get it.
You know, and finishing. I mean, kudos to everyone, because finishing a documentary during a global pandemic is like unbelievable. I mean, just in my own personal experience, like I would have taken a year of shooting. I shot between getting my vaccine this time last year and August 1st, when I thought Delta would probably come in more in the West. And that was an insane schedule. And then I felt like I really need to get these stories completed and done, which getting it done before December, also insane. So this has been, I'm so proud that I got it over the finish line, but I'm also just like a little mentally taxed. So I feel like I want to take a little time just to sort of kind of think that through a little bit. I am interested in possibly producing like a podcast series. And I feel like what we do lends itself to that. I love the visual. I actually, similar to you, Sam, I actually come from, I'm a 4th generation photojournalist. And so it was sort of one of these family things that I felt like I couldn't quite get away from, but so I'd like the visual part of it. But I think that the audio part of what we do is also lends itself to this other format. And given how much of my budget went to editing and to an editor, you know, there's a part of me that feels like, well, maybe I can tell these stories without that visual part, and maybe I could do it more efficiently in some respects. So I want to sort of explore that a little bit more.
Okay, great. Anu, how about you?
So we do not have distribution. If anybody wants to talk to us, please come come on over, and we're happy to have that conversation. We would really, really like to actually play the film on public television. So that is one of our goals. We just started the film festival circuit though, so we're like exploring those options right now. In terms of projects, I'm working on a film about language and how it informs cultural and personal identity, and filming it with immigrant Indian families in the US, but also migrant Indian families in India, and looking at how in India, you know, English becomes the language of opportunity, but in the US, looking back and really trying to hold on to your cultural identity through your mother tongue, you know, and how that, you know, especially when you're talking about a time where nationalism is on the rise in India and the US, like how that, you know, provides a backdrop that makes it scary to actually speak your own language. So that's what I'm working on, amongst a few other short personal documentaries. It is one of my most favorite forms, and I just am so looking forward to seeing all of your films, because I haven't had a chance to watch them yet, but it's been an honor being on this panel with all of you too. Thank you.
And Sam, I understand you had a broadcast deal before you started shooting? Yeah.
Yeah. So so we've been broadcast here in Australia, and we have were picked up for international sales by Off the Fence, who did My Octopus Teacher. So we're actually sort of nearing the end of our festival run, and in the hands of Off the Fence to see where it kind of ends up around the world. But yeah, I think, like Amanda said, it's really exhausting, and I had to take quite a lot of time off when we finished this film to sort of be able to sleep and grieve off camera. And so I actually started a little side business for a while, just to sort of clear my head, selling planners and diaries, which was really fun. And I'm now back working for a scripted company called Sea Pictures here in West Australia, pushing this slate forward. I feel like stepping away from film, and actually just this conversation and hearing you all talk about your own films has just been such a nice reminder of part of making Laura's Choice was realizing that at the end of your life, what really matters is not what you've done, but your relationships. And that's such a big part of filmmaking, is the relationships and the people that you work with and the people that you meet, and being able to sit on panels like this. It's such a wonderful part of filmmaking and of existing. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been so wonderful.
Well, I have been really honored to share this time with amazing women filmmakers. Looking forward to the day when we just take over filmmaking as a whole. And so I look forward to all of your work in the future, and I recommend that everybody watching the panel see these amazing, beautiful documentaries. I wish you guys all the luck in the future with your filmmaking. May you get lots of funding, great distribution, and have your next project be far less exhausting, although that has not been my experience, but maybe that'll happen for us. All right, you all, thank you so much, and see you at the festival. Bye, guys.
Thank you.